yeah, I think it's a great honor to be asked just to moderate this session. Thank you, Brent, and thank you, Tony. Kali, it's great to see you again. You and I have met before on the conference circuit. And
absolutely.
Great to see you, Angus and Mohammed. So, if I may, I'll start by introducing Kali. Kali's the CEO of the data company, the chairman and the co-founder of Data Company Technologies, a firm that helps enterprises rapidly achieve digital transformation through data-driven solutions. With over 30 years in the ID industry, Kali specializes in data lifecycle management, AI, and digital services across sectors like insurance, healthcare, manufacturing, and logistics. He's dedicated to providing executives with a single source of truth and actionable insights by combining innovative technology, expert consultancy, and end-to-end support to drive impactful business decisions. So, Kali, if we can start with you, it would be great to hear from you. In fact, I'm going to ask you to kick off with the same thing. Is like, if you wouldn't mind, if you could start by giving us your perspective on how you define the last mile problem, and over to you.
Yeah, so Bruce, just to add, I think from the bio, I think it's probably needed updating from last year. I've now working back with Sapiens again as well, so I'm still chairman of the data company. But Sapiens have had a big drive around data and AI and moving to the cloud with all of their core policy administration platforms. And I helped Sapiens enter the market into South Africa sort of 10 years ago. Now active with them with a role of sort of VP for business development within South Africa and the Nordics. So that's been a key driver of mine where I think, as you know, Bruce, over the years, for me, a passion of mine has been data, and particularly around how the broker community, and I believe we've got a large participation from the broker community on this session today that are registered. It's, you've got lots across the whole value chain, from gathering facts and information and needs analysis through to being able to get quotes. A lot of those processes involve sort of manual data capture or transformation of data from one system to another system. And I'm sure, Angus, with some of the stuff from a BarnOwl perspective, you'll cover that angle maybe a bit later. But then putting that data onto a policy system and making sure it's consistent with what was sort of offered in the first place and is bound correctly. There's been a lot of challenges with the insurers and the brokers for that consistency in data. And then really from my perspective, it's how do you get value from the data that you've captured over maybe a 10, 15, 20-year relationship with a client, mapping the changes in their lifestyle. All of that data exists somewhere in our ecosystem. It may be on a spreadsheet, it may be on a Word document, it may be in a CRM system, it may be in a policy administration system. But it's really now using things like AI and machine learning, we can process and model large volumes of data very, very quickly. So it's how do we use that data to suddenly then look for opportunities like a cross-sell or an upsell based on the data that we've already got? And how do we score leads so that the brokers are using the time they have effectively chasing and closing down business with individuals who are most likely to buy? And I think using the technology we have today and the developments we're getting around AI and the sort of solutions like from Sapiens, we have a solution called Doc AI, where we can take lots of different documents, analyze those and summarize those very, very quickly and help the brokers at point of sale and prompt them to ask specific questions around specific products. So it's really streamlining the whole process from start to finish, and also providing a better customer service with, you could get a 360 view of a client very, very easily. So that when you are preparing to go for the next meeting with a client or a quarterly review or an annual review, you have that information at your fingertips and almost use that to drive the needs analysis and where individuals are in the life cycle. So I think the data is key. As we have, our tagline used to be, the data is in the oil. I'm told today people are calling it the new oxygen. We've all got to work with it, live with it, and really be smart as to how we process that. And using AI doesn't mean humans are eliminated from the loop. That human interaction and final decision, I would suggest, and with some of the models we're building at Sapiens, are very much focused around working with Microsoft to look at what grunt work can we take out and how can we make the lives of all the end users in the whole value chain better and easier, rather than doing all of the grunt work, getting these models to process the grunt work, but then the individuals to provide that human intelligence as to how to make and what decisions to make using that data. Bruce, I don't know whether that helps sort of set the scene from my perspective.
Yeah, that's great, Kali. And something else, just again, because I'm going to hand over to you really, but what I think would be just amazing to hear, because I know, of course, we met last year at a Sapiens conference.
Yes.
And you know, I'm aware of your, of your role at Sapiens, but especially the combination of AI and the ability to communicate in natural language and getting insights and key benefits out of data. If that is an interface that is already available, and if you could maybe speak a little bit about that.
So look, from our point of view, that's already available in our Sapiens offerings. So we're working with clients, particularly around commercial lines insurance, where you've got complex risks that you're trying to manage, by entering natural language into our models. We can actually process that data, bring and summarize data from lots of different data sources. And I know some of my colleagues on here will talk more about some of the services they provide, but it's access to that industry-wide data as well as the data you've got within. And a good example of a case where we've done is, look, commercial brokers, underwriting, Graham may have covered it in his presentation, but a coffee shop in Melrose Arch, and as you're quoting the data, freely you could be asking the models, are there any other coffee shops in that area? And it will go in the background, bring out examples of 2 or 3 other coffee shops. So again, in that sales process, you're using that AI in the background to do a lot of the heavy lifting, bringing that data, consolidating it on a screen. So when you're talking to your prospect or your client, you can say, look, the covers that we're recommending for yourselves are very similar to Paul's in Melrose Arch, which have got a very similar sandwich business and coffee shop to yourself. So it just gives that personalization. So I think that's an area that we'll all move into, and we've talked about it in the past, I know, with yourself, Bruce, on sort of personal lines and commodity, motor and etc., that we can use AI to personalize that based on the type of vehicles you drive in, or the age of the drivers, or using telematics data. But now I think we're seeing really a big offering we're pushing is around the commercial insurance side from a Sapiens, where those models are deployed, ready to use. And again, talking to prospects and customers and analysts in South Africa, there seems to be a lot of traction, and it can save a lot of time and bring in those efficiencies and then improve your underwriting and also your claims experience. Because again, at that point of sale, we're not just looking at data from a pricing point of view, but we're able to go out to places like the Insurance Crime Bureau or sanctions lists in the background automatically to see whether the client that's asking for an insurance quote has been a fraudulent client in the past, or to the banks, whether they've been a bad payer. So using all of that data without the client knowing, we can provide a much better value proposition and a much better proposition to the end clients, and improve our underwriting and as well as our claims process.
Right, so then, all right, I'm going to introduce Angus. Angus, you are currently the co-founder of BarnOwl Data Solutions.
Yeah.
Just checking.
I hope so.
I also had, I had to modify my intro a bit. So Angus Black, the co-founder of BarnOwl Data Solutions, who brings deep technical expertise in insurance-focused software and data solutions. With over 15 years in the short-term insurance tech, his background spans development, product strategy, and market delivery, including his pivotal role in launching the BarnOwl Insurance Data Warehouse. So, Angus, over to you. Your thoughts on what for you is the last mile sort of challenge, and how to tackle it.
Yeah, sure. So we're very involved with that last mile. and getting the data through. You know, from our perspective, we're working with 30 plus different insurance management systems in the market and collecting data from 500 odd brokers on a daily and a monthly basis. So we're quite heavily involved in that last mile, and that's kind of what we do. I thought I'd focus on two of the links, if you want to call them that, the missing links, the key links in this process that I kind of see. And that being the first one, the human element or the human intelligence link and how that fits into this last mile, and then the technology and process link. So what those two kind of mean to this process. So from the human part of it, I think, you know, and maybe what I'll focus on, what do you got to do to make this a success? Not necessarily what we do, but in general, you know, you've got to engage meaningfully with those sources. And in our space, those are the brokers that are out there in the market. And whilst they're not our direct customers, they indirectly are. We work with a lot of them at numerous different customers. So we almost have some more touch points with some brokers than we do with some of our customers. And I think you need to, from the human side, engage with them to understand any nuances that they may have. So they may work slightly differently to another broker, or they may have certain things that set up in a different way that you need to understand so that you can understand the data that you're asking for or that you're trying to get. I think things like timing there can be quite important. You know, one broker might be slightly different to the other, or even if there's some sort of bespoke products in place for a particular broker, that's also something you need to understand. I think one of the things we often hear about is data sources or brokers saying, you know, they send this data in and it just goes into what they seem as some sort of black hole. It's gone. Never get any feedback. They don't know if it's valuable or there's any problems with it. And then when there are problems, those become a bit of a catastrophe. So that feedback loop is quite important and consistent. And I think when you go into any sort of engagement like this, you need very clear rules and who's going to be responsible for what if anything goes wrong, because things go wrong operationally, they do. And I think you need to agree on that up front straight off the bat. So, you know, if data's not here on time, who do we talk to? What could the problems be? And then, you know, from a broker's perspective, you know, there's been a lot of focus in the last few years, certainly in our space, around data quality and improving data quality. And I think one of the key things to know is, you know, what's not hygienic or good data quality today may have been in the past, because that has changed. Regulations change that, compliance changed that, additional rating has changed that. So you always got to go into that with your eyes wide open, and you can get it improved, and that typically will take time and an exercise to get that additional piece of information. Or what Kali was mentioning earlier, you can get a lot of that info from external data sources too. So those are things you can leverage off nowadays as well. So that's sort of the human link or the human thing that we see and how we work with. On the technology side, I think whatever data process you're building or trying to collect data, it needs to be repeatable and robust. So it needs to be consistent. So whatever you're doing, it needs to be the same thing from day to day. It can't change massively. I think if you ever want to get anyone's backup or make some really great friends, you can tell them from one day to the next, your data is no good today. It's the same data you sent yesterday. All of a sudden there's hundreds of issues and you can't use this until you fix it yesterday. So that can make you a lot of friends very, very quickly in life. So you need to be consistent, and that process must be quite clear. And then be clear about what you're looking for. And I think we've done that with a data standard. So you want to adopt the same standard across your whole data value chain. So, you know, what is gross written premium? Does it include commission? Does it include fees? Does it include VAT? You be clear on that. And then that must be adopted across that whole data value chain. So everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet. So you don't have one team within a business asking someone for something and someone asking for someone else, and it's slightly different, or yeah, we don't want that and this we do. You know, you need to be clear about those things. And I think if you can, what you need to do is automate any sort of validation or feedback loops. So when people send data in or you're processing data, you've got someone's attention, send it straight back if there's issues. So they know very quickly if there's a problem, and be as verbose as you can with those issues as well. So, you know, this date can't be that because that date's that. Be clear. Don't say this data we can't process because it doesn't quite fit into some very high level rule. I think that's definitely something you want to focus on and making sure it works. And then, you know, if you want to really achieve the best possible outcome, you want to normalize and conform the data from multiple different sources, because it's never all the same. It might be similar, but it's never really exactly the same. Traditionally, that's been done with some sort of mapping process where you'd say this goes there and that goes there, and you draw arrows and you link up the blocks and you make it all work. That's somewhere strategically where that's changing now, and that's the AI's fitting into that quite nicely. In the past, we worked with sort of machine learning to try and do that stuff, but it didn't have that intelligence behind it that the AI tools and natural language tools have now, where they know what insurance is and they know what this kind of means, and that's something that we're working with now. I think it's going to add a lot of value in the future and streamline a lot of stuff and make it easier to work with. And then, lastly, whatever you want to do, you need to store it and structure it in a way that it's very logical, so it can be seamlessly integrated into whatever analytics tool, AI tool you want to use, so that it's quite simple to get that. So that data model needs to make sense and be easy for anyone to understand, particularly business users, if they're the intended audience and you want them to sort of self-serve off this data. And that's quite a key piece of the puzzle. So those are the two links I thought I'd maybe just talk a little bit about. I think, and if you follow these relatively basic principles, I think you'll get yourself a long way to solving that long last mile problem and get yourself reliable data into the right hands within any sort of process. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Angus.
Pleasure.
Is this? Would you like to finish your talk?
No, that's it. I think that's kind of we can happy
Great.
chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Superb. Superb. Great. So then let's move to Mohammed. So Mohammed Vadee is the interim chief executive officer for Astute FSE. I've got that right, hey, Mohammed?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. So Mohammed is a seasoned executive with 20 plus years of cross-industry leadership in operations, IT, and digital transformation. He led digital change at Old Mutual and contributed to key African infrastructure projects. He's a visionary entrepreneur and a board member, and committed to innovation and developing future leaders. So Mohammed, maybe I could start you off in the same way, just your thoughts and perspectives on this last mile, not only how you see the problem, but your little insights into the solution. And the other question that I, when I did the prep, sort of looking at the work you've done, integrating data into a single point. Is a single data warehouse the only solution, or are there other strategies like virtualization and data fabric, etc.? If you could think about those two questions, please. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks for the opportunity, and thanks to TechFest for putting such important conferences together where we're discussing such pertinent topics. I'm going to share a presentation, so maybe if you just let me know if it's showing on your side.
It's there. We can see it.
See, let me just put it in presentation mode. There we go. Okay. So I represent what Tony introduced this morning as, the regional masterminds of data exchange. And I like to refer to us rather as a 25-year-old startup. And, we play a particular role in being a bridge builder in the financial services data ecosystem. And so today, we've heard a lot about, many of the great speakers speak about things relating to, it's not just about having access to data or more data, but it's more around how do you make the data matter? And so that probably leads me into what is this last mile challenge? And so I think, as I've mentioned, is we're not at shortage of data in terms of the abundance of it. The challenge is really, converting it to timely and actionable intelligence, really. And so the last mile challenge, the topic of this particular panel, it's not just a technical sort of hurdle. It's more of a human and systematic issue. And so we see even the most sophisticated data warehouses, to the point that you asked me, they really are useless if the frontline teams don't have access to interpret that data at a particular point in time to make better decisions. And so we find that, so many insurers are just drowning in the data, but the last mile challenge still exists. And, I believe it's more related to the human aspect and systematic issues. And so you see some of this very prevalent. And even though we still got so many measures in place in, stopping fraud, we We still see it happening today. It's better, no doubt about it. And we are addressing risk at a fairly large scale, but we still see it taking place. And I believe it's because, fraud detection is delayed to some degree. It's not always at the right time where we're able to pick these things up. And so we see this, one of the limitations being is because of the siloed data across the ecosystem, that we're unable to make it meaningful at that particular point in time where we need access to it. So the goal is clear. Deliver the right data to the right people, at the right time in the best format. And so in being able to address this, I think there's a couple of pertinent issues, and I'll spend a bit more time on this slide and then, move on to just towards concluding. But we have to be able to transition from, the problem mindset into more solution. And while that sounds a fay, the goal is about activation and not just collection. We've been working for so long just about collecting. It now needs to be about activation. And activation happens, at that particular point in time when the data is relevant. And so no doubt we need the plumbing. We have to be able to promote open standards, APIs, seamless data flows. Those are all critical components. And we have to build tools and dashboards, designed for decision-making. But we've also got to focus on the data visualization and alerts and storytelling around what the data tells us. And that makes this last mile very meaningful in terms of how do you actually turn it into notable and activation points. But there's also an element of recognizing that the data use is a cultural and operational shift. It's not just technological upgrade. There's an element of transforming the organization in what you do with it. And so there are real business use cases where we have to apply ourselves and say, well, what are those meaningful data moments across the value chain? And I'll touch on some of them because I think they're quite pertinent, and we do play a role in some. In others, I think we aspire to play a role in. And if you look at things like underwriting, the pre-population of underwriting information with real-time data across multiple sources, looking at existing policies, existing claims, lifestyle data, etc., becomes very meaningful in that particular, use case. Claims, for example, I know we spoke, I've heard the previous panel speak about, these various elements across the value chain, but it's about enabling that rapid triage of claims using, past behavior and kind of being able to highlight any detection points or external data sets that can influence that particular point in time around a claim or the value of a claim or quality of a claim. And then I'll go, back to the fraud detection one in terms of just using centralized information. But the important thing is to cross insurance data to be able to detect suspicious, patterns and high-risk events. And so the point there is really about lifting the centralization of that information to be able to cover all bases. And then, there's product innovation in terms of the use case or the business use case in using trends and analytics to be able to anticipate what the customer's needs and gaps are. And many of the insurers are trying to go at that alone. And I think this is where we potentially are getting it slightly wrong in the sense of there isn't necessarily just competitive advantage in getting it right. However, you need to be able to share the data and consume data which completes the story. And that's where the power lies. Okay. And so industry collaboration is of utmost importance. We've got to be able to look at, sharing of data as a strategic asset. And I still think, we look at it as an institutional asset. It needs to be an industry-wide asset because that's where the power really lies in terms of the last mile. And so, collaboration through these neutral platforms, really does is able to give us, shared outcomes. And that's, I think, what we all after. And so our observation, we play a particular role across the industry and we see some doing it better than others. And I think the things that particular players are doing, which is, starting to show significant dial shifters in terms of getting it right in that last mile, is they've got cross-functional teams. They break those silos deliberately at an organizational level as well as a process level. And so they integrate data and IT a lot more. The other aspect is just, data product thinking, treating data pipelines as and APIs as products and not just as projects and not just enablers. They actually are products. And for our business, we most certainly recognize them as products, And then the last one is just the data literacy and the change management. It comes again back to the human aspect. We have to ensure, the roles or every role in the organization really can interpret and act on insights. It's not just about production of reports and, sending it somewhere else. It's about being able to really apply yourself at that particular point in time with the information that's relevant and be able to do something about it. And so a bit of what we do, and I think our role in terms of trying to enable this, cross-industry last mile challenge, we really do focus on the data state standardization and quality, the verification of data, for analytical readiness. But we don't have the ability to be able to course or correct that data at source. We're still reliant on the quality of data at source. So that's perhaps just a topic of discussion or further discussion around how do we improve that? Because for us to be able to represent that meaningfully and deal with the last mile challenges is to really get the quality that's much better than what we currently see. We still serve as one of the trusted, data exchanges. So security is of utmost importance and will remain of utmost importance for us to be able to, do what we do very securely. But we also think that in the manner that we do things, it does reduce integration time across the value chain. So us being positioned as that enabler in a larger degree does take away the pain of integration at a source level. And then just the collaboration across having the neutrality around things like fraud detection, compliance, onboarding, areas where there's no real competitive advantage, but rather the safety of data across the ecosystem. And then lastly, what's ingrained within Astute is just the innovation aspect. And we're constantly developing, on our environments to ensure that they are being looked at in terms of enabling data-driven solutioning in organizations, taking away a lot of the enablement pains from our clients and being able for us to be able to do that in a much more integrated manner. Okay, so I'll wrap up on this one, but how do we make this last mile really count? And just to reiterate the point around the real value of data is unlocking it, only when it's usable at the point of decision making. We've got to be able to focus on that. The end game here is not about data collection. And the value really comes from making data usable at that point of decision. The call out again around the industry-wide collaboration is a really important point. I think we've seen pockets of this, but still there's the mindset of, data is singular in nature. And so we have to be able to enable a lot of these collaboration efforts. It allows us to be able to show shared fraud detection capabilities, compliance, cost savings, faster onboarding, product launches. So we take care of a lot of that. And then last but not least, I just want to highlight a challenge, I suppose, in treating this as a strategic asset is look internally within your organizations and your respective constituencies that you represent and look at how you treat data as its strategic asset and, rather than a byproduct of operations primarily. And that will enable it to be elevated and really dealing with it at a last mile, on the last mile aspect. Okay.
Thank you, Mohammed. A couple of questions. I think maybe my question I'll turn into a comment and you can respond if you want to, but there's another question from Tony.
Sure.
Yeah, what was one of my key takeaways is the point you made right in the beginning about getting the right data at the right time to the right user in the right usable format. I've maybe not got it perfectly right, but that's the gist of, I think, what you said. So that's massive. It's data in its recesses, in its silos, getting it somehow out, somehow integrated, somehow data warehoused or whatever, and then to the right user for the right use. Massive. And your other point is about cross-functional teams. That's actually a point I believe in. I made that point before the lunch break. I think it's great. If there's time, I'd like to ask you for your favorite example or two of that. But first, I just want to give you Tony's question. He says, I realize the IP of clients is important, but as someone who works with most providers in the life space, is there a way to share learnings between clients in the insight to action quest? Tony, if you're on the panel, maybe you could just elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, Mohammed, putting you on the spot a little bit. I was just thinking, I mean, you work with most of the providers in the life space. They all connect, and you know, this quest on that last mile solution and the learnings that each of these clients have in their processes, and that a lot of that shared with you or enabled by you, etc. Do you have some sort of a way of sharing some of those insights that comes up to where clients can benefit more from this interaction and the data sharing, etc.?
Yeah. Look, I think it's a bit of a fine line, because if you look at our own progression as Astute, a lot of it was enabling that plumbing, you know, and now we're looking at kind of value added elements on top of that. You know, I mean, we able to then troll through the information and lift out some industry insights would be of absolute value. I do believe it's something we would want to work towards. The challenge that we have is our ability to retain that information and being able to do things that we need with the information that does create the value. So there I'd bring it back to the point of, let's have the round discussions around us holding on to that data to produce those value adds, because we do have a richer source of data that we can access. Now, I'm not saying we need to transform ourselves entirely into just a data information area. You know, that would not be correct, because a lot of it is the enablement and the ingestion of this data to be able to facilitate the movement of the data and insights at the point of transaction or process. But I do think it would be valuable, Tony, to your point in question around being able to lift up some of those industry things. I think technically it's all possible, but from an acceptance perspective, from a regulatory perspective, can we position ourselves as that enabler for that? It is absolutely an aspiration, but we would need the support of partners in that regard to say we're willing to share our information, not just for being able to use it in facilitating a transaction, but actually use it to ingest it and make meaningful sense of what's actually happening in the market. We would have the ability to be able to do that. I think it's a nice transformational point for us in terms of our own growth, in where we find ourselves adding more value up the value chain.
Bruce, if you don't mind me just adding on to that, Mohammed, I was originally involved when Astute just started negotiating the data sharing between companies, and I know there was a lot of friction. You know, people didn't want to, and some didn't want to, and others wanted different ways of doing it, etc., etc. But there was a lot of collaboration and committees and all of that around the industry, where people came together and spoke about this need collectively as to how much will it contribute to the industry if we can actually do this, and if we can work together. And eventually, you sitting with the sort of quite revolutionized product, where the product has actually achieved that, and the people have committed and shared, etc. So it would be, as you said, a nice thing to aspire to in the longer term, is to see how does the industry further benefit now from this collaboration that they're already doing in some way.
Tony, I like to think of us as we like an active citizen participation. You know, you can sit back and see your rates and taxes be used, and you can say, I'm paying my bit anyway, so it's fine. Or you can actually have those community forums where you say, you know, that green space needs to be developed a bit more. I'm using an abstract example to illustrate the point in terms of that activism. And so the activism is really needed in facilitating a lot of those discussions, in saying, actually, there's a push towards, from contributors of the data, in sitting down and having each other around the table and drive towards those value adds. I do think we've hit a bit of a plateau in that regard, where early days for us to be able to enable that was attractive. we were able to facilitate that through technology, and it had its purpose. But if you looking at things like AI and the intelligence around data, I do think those conversations need to excel to the point that you're highlighting. Let's actively engage around those. So I think in that regard, we're an enabler of that, but I think we need a bit more involvement from industry to promote those engagements. So platforms like this is excellent to be able to highlight the fact that I think that active participation in identifying how we can commonly contribute to those outcomes that benefit a larger, and we've got to have that abundance mentality in this regard, Tony.
Mohammed, Tony, if I could just add, just picking up on Tony, your comment, and Mohammed, I mean, one of the areas, a real example that we've actually delivered for a large bancassurer in South Africa was for their fiduciary department, where death claims obviously are a very stressful and distress time for individuals, where beneficiaries may not know what policies or what cover the individual who's passed away has had with the organization. And then with this particular organization, they sell short-term insurance, bonds, investments, and a funeral plan and protection. So we actually work with them using AI and robotic process automation to basically allow an individual just to send an email or a phone call with some information. It might be about their name, it might be about their identity number, it may be whatever. And then actually using the technology at point of claim to go into all of the systems or the data warehouses that they had within the organization to try and pull out all of the products that they may have taken with them over time. And obviously within life and pensions and long-term insurance, some of the data on those products might be 15, 20 years old and not being maintained. But if they'd had a short-term product or using organizations like TransUnion, we could actually get and actually augment and enrich the data that was provided at point of claim and make that whole process better, so that the organization, the bancassurer, was able to be proactive for the client, manage them through that process and inform them of different products they had, and try and recover those. So I think one of the key things for the last mile for me is putting the customer first. That claims experience, and when they're in distress, how do we put them back or help them for the reason they took the product? And in a life and pensions product, it may be something that they took out 20, 30 years ago. But at the time of need, we need to be able to use that data to make their experience an easy and a positive experience, so that they actually get back what they deserve. And then that's where I think the industry needs to focus more.
I mean, if I could come
Yeah,
in,
if I can,
Kali's point
I
as
can
well.
bring in. Sorry. You're
Sorry,
responding.
can I go ahead? Yeah, I was just going to see
Sure.
Kali's viewpoint around. I think a lot of what you'd see in terms of product development is we're going cross vertical. Now, to the client to be able to seamlessly integrate at a level where whatever that vertical touch point is, we've seen telecoms and insurance, coming closer together. You can't have an updated transactional engagement with a telco, and if they're providing insurance services, be expected to deal with them separately in that regard. The expectation from the client, and I think a rightful expectation is that
100%.
is being able to say, I've given you that information in a different vertical. The integration of that is now going cross vertical, and we've got to sort that out.
Look, Mohammed, I agree with you, because from a client perspective, it's not their issue that you're running multiple systems to administer different products that you're selling to them. So that's got to be our challenge in the industry, to see how do we make their experience and the association with insurance as, yes, when I needed it, I was served and I got my claim paid if it was a legitimate claim. We also need to deter and look at fraudulent claims, etc., like you mentioned, and pick those up and see how we can share that amongst other information. And I think organizations like the Insurance Crime Bureau are working on that. I know they were much stronger historically on the short-term insurance side. They're now growing on the life and pensions and long-term insurance as well, through clients, and potentially looking to move into banking. So over time, I think organizations like there with Garth do provide data, but on request. But it's not shared amongst the insurers, which I agree with you. I don't know how we deal with that because everybody's protective about that data.
Okay, so thank you, guys. I just want to bring in Angus. Angus, I've got a question to put to you, and I've noticed something regarding the work you've done that I just thought I'd ask you about data quality and governance, right? So, you know, the old saying, garbage in, garbage out, very relevant. What are your thoughts on some of the key strategies for ensuring data quality and establishing strong data governance, especially a data governance framework that supports this data to intelligence pipeline? Because I noticed something about you've done a lot of work on data remediation through data quality and business rules. Could you just share your perspectives on that with us, please, Angus?
Yeah, no, sure. So it is a big part of what we do, and I think particularly in the short-term space, the front end or the inputter is a human. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, what was quality before might not be quality now. So things do change, and there are clever ways to fix that and tools that can be used now. But a lot of the time, it takes kind of sitting down and saying, well, what are the key things that we need to improve? And then you need to be able to measure it and say, well, what is it? Is it good or is it bad? You know, what percentage is it? And then develop that strategy to get fixed. And that often involves going back to the source. And same as Mohammed said earlier, you know, generally tech companies are not the source in a way, and you got to go back to that source and get it fixed there. And then continuing that loop to say, you know, last month it was 10%, now it's 20, now it's 30. It's getting better. Things are improving. And a lot of that will happen with data quality or, you know, missing data, typically on renewal. Every year we'll go back to the policyholder, we'll be sitting executing the renewal, and then we'd say, well, you know, we need these 5 or 6 different data elements to populate now on that policy. And then you gradually watch the data quality improve. And that, you know, that's been a lot of what we've done with a lot of our customers to improve the data quality. So it's a human process, it's not automated. But I mentioned earlier is there are external third-party data sources you can go to look up stuff. So say you're missing, say you've got the policyholder's ID number, but you need other pieces of information, you can get that. Or, you know, you've got their address, you can get the GPS coordinates and other info around where this property might be. You can look at external sources like that. So, but it's not a flick a switch and the data quality is fixed. It's a process, and I think you need to commit to it and know that it's going to take you some time to get it there.
Yeah, and you mentioned going back to the source, right? Because I would imagine there's still a lot of insurers probably in this audience who have legacy systems that are difficult to integrate. So maybe question for you, Kali. And anyone who wants to comment on this, because I think it's often a reality. We'd love to think we're in this perfectly digitized world, but I think a lot of us sit with legacy systems, and the source sometimes of a lot of our data is in the legacy system. So Kali, question to you first. You probably have a lot of experience dealing with legacy system modernization and cloud migrations. And what advice would you have for companies trying to modernize their data infrastructure? Would you say a complete overhaul is necessary, or hybrid approaches can work as well?
Yeah, look, for me, a hybrid approach is always the best way to start. It's to identify the key areas that you can, and depending on whether you're doing a short-term transformation or a life and pensions transformation, there are very different considerations. You know, with short-term, generally, the data quality is much better because they're either annually or monthly renewable policies. So you've had that data validated probably within the last 12, 18 months for those types of policies. So your data is going to be more accurate. So there, one of the options as a low risk option, if it's possible, is almost to put in a new platform and then migrate on renewal, because at that time you've got to do something anyway. So that's one option we've used. Other organizations decide that's not the best approach. They want to do a big bang because there may be business case issues around decommissioning an old legacy platform to bring in a new one. So there's financial implications. The key thing we say there on these transformations, because of the data, is not to leave it to the end of the project. the data migration on these projects often ends up being on the critical path, and organizations generally leave it till later on in the day because they think they don't need it until they go live. But one of the areas, again, Sapiens are working actively on is looking to see how we can use AI to almost map the data from a source system to a target system and define any transformation rules that need to be defined. And I'll give you a very simple example to keep it very high level. You know, it could be a yes, no flag in an old system, and it may be a 1 or a 2 in the next to hold some sort of indicator. So that data has to be transformed, or it may have been a character field in one system and it's a numeric field in the next one. So looking at those things, the AI can pick up those patterns and probably do 80% of that automatically. And then we announced that at our last vendor conference in Vienna earlier in the year, where we're looking now for pilot customers to drive that. And not just to drive the mapping of the data, but also to use AI to support generating test cases and then doing automated testing, because that's a large part of the work during a data migration. So from our experience, if you can look at those areas and not leave the migration till the end of the program, start it early and run it along the program, it reduces the risk. Just
Great.
conscious of time. I don't know whether Angus, you want to add to that. Obviously, you're involved in the periphery.
No, 100%. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, you know, data migrations or system moves, it's a bit of almost like a swear word. You know, it's never easy, and certainly not something you want to leave to the end. And in a way, it's what we kind of do on a day-to-day basis, and it isn't easy. Thankfully, there are tools. I mean, you're quite right. Some of these AI tools are very useful nowadays to solve a lot of this and to clean a lot of things up, because nothing's ever the same, really. Like I was saying earlier, one thing in one system might look similar but different to another, and they're never going to match. And to get that single view, or to move it from one system to another, it's challenging. It's not easy.
And Angus, around that, I think the point you mentioned earlier was make sure that you've got your data governance and your glossary. So what does a data item mean in this system on the left, and what does it mean on the system on the right? Yeah. I think you use the example of, does it include commission or not? You know, so it's very much defining a glossary and then mapping the life cycle of that data through the organization. And it seems like an overhead to most people at the start. But if you look at it from the end of a project, from our experience, if you've defined that correctly up front, it's a much easier conversation to have with the business when you might moving this data from there. And I think, Angus, you mentioned it earlier, that clarity as to what does that data item mean?
Yeah.
100%. And yeah, so guys, I think it was Angus who used this phrase, the human element. It's a great phrase. And I want to move on to the human element, talent and culture, the really messy part, right? The part that isn't ones and zeros. And so I want to ask, maybe I want to start with Mohammed, because one of the things I noticed about Astute is there's a mention about an emphasis on upskilling of people, etc. So Mohammed, in your view, what are the skills that are missing in the insurance industry that will help successfully bridge this gap? Because we keep talking about getting from data to intelligence and action. What are the skills that are the key skills? I mean, not like a laundry list, just like the main skills that are missing. And how can companies foster this data-driven culture and break down these barriers, these siloed departmental barriers?
I think a very good question. I mean, it's one of the things that I believe we've got to crack as an industry. I think, from my perspective, is traditionally we've set up financial services institutions replicating manufacturing industries. So we've got processes in place, and we measure processes and the effectiveness of processes. And we did very similar in terms of our job classification. We had a data scientist, and we had a technology person, and we had a frontman salesman, and we had a marketing. Now, I'm not discounting the specialization aspect to that, where you require depth, but there needs to be an ingestion of knowledge across these different functions for effective progress in this space. So where you have, data scientists or data fields, or sorry, data roles in particular, focused on their speciality, they've got to be able to understand the business. They've got to be able to understand the client. They've got to be able to understand the end users. And similarly with the technology. So, my suggestion is some of the more traditional roles in terms of just specialist roles for the sake of having them, drop the labels and ensure that there's a much more seamless integration of understanding the business logic as well as the technical enablement. You can't have business seniors saying, well, that's the technology department's problem. I don't think that is going to work anymore. You've got to have boards, you've got to have top table discussions with deep conversations around technical abilities and capabilities. And so that requires, seniors, executives, etc., with a level of proficiency in technology and data. And so I like to think about that multifaceted career development where it actually incorporates different aspects. The specialists are good and the specialists will always be there. But in terms of decision makers, you can't have the manufacturing approach where we're going to do this and pass it on, or we're going to do this and we're going to pass it on. That is a lot more integrated and seamless. So the blending of those skill sets is something that has to be a bit more deliberate. And I think from our perspective, most certainly is, yes, as much as there's technical competencies to enable a lot of this, we're highlighting the personas, we're highlighting the customer journeys, we're highlighting the use cases of that. Because it's important that the specialists are able to then apply themselves in terms of problem solutions, or problems rather in solutioning for, where they bring that logic to the forefront using technical capabilities and skill sets. So the blended mix, Bruce, to come to the point, is much more needed now than ever. This manufacturing mindset of I will do my component while bringing a specialist just to do one thing and then bugger off and lose the context of what the end game is. We need to stop that mindset.
Bruce, one of the things we're doing at Sapiens, which I think is fairly unique in that vendor space, is we've actually created what we call a Sapiens insurance practice. And then product managers, people like Graham that you've heard from this morning, that sort of practitioners who have come from the insurance sector, but are now working with our technology guys, so that they're very much, Mohammed, a bit like you said, articulating what is the need and what are the business looking for? Because like you said, we've got terabytes and terabytes of data. And as technicians, we end up producing reports that we think the business want and might like, and spreadsheets, but half the time the business can't understand what data they're getting and what decisions does it enable. So having people like Graham on the team who can stand back and take a view to say, what are we using this data for? What decisions are we looking to make? And then to give that business problem back to the technical guys to say, this is what I want. You now work out and figure out where the data comes from and where it's sourced from, and how you produce it and articulate it. And then visualizing that data, I think, is very, very important, because I've sat in so many presentations where we've had wonderful dashboards generated by Power BI, but to try and understand them and understand what the meaning behind them sometimes is very, very difficult. So sometimes keeping it simple to give you the data you want, that then allows you to make the decision, is a very, very important point. And that's not technical programmers and developers in this space. So Bruce, I think that bridge between, what's the business objective and the need, and then working out technically how we can get the data, I think is a new skill that we should start looking at bringing into the industry.
I liked your last example because you mentioned Power BI. Power BI is an amazing platform. I use it in my business. And what is amazing, though, about it is that it is primarily, or at least the way I've used it, aimed at a particular user type, and that's the decision maker, the senior decision maker. What about other user types? What about, and of course it's happening, but so maybe I'm going to ask Angus. You're the one who used this little phrase that I like, human element. Kali has mentioned Power BI, which is a great way to put visualization onto data, but for the decision maker, for the business decision maker. How can we bring in the human element to help agents, to help underwriters? Have you got any insights, Angus, on
Yeah.
little key things on the human
Yeah.
element that you've seen from your experience.
Yeah, and I think it's quite a good one. And I think most people will relate to it. So Power BI is great, and we use it a lot, and we build dashboards and fancy reports. But like you say, there's another level of user that might not necessarily find it useful. And the good thing is you can always export this stuff to Excel. And Excel still runs the world, and I don't think the AI will destroy Excel even. So we often will build a fancy dashboard report, show it to our customers. They'll say, it's great, answer my question, but can I have it in Excel? And I think that's still going to be the way. And you can export it always, but it's not going to answer all the questions, sure. You can build nice reports with drill throughs into more detail and stuff like that. But a lot of these reporting tools, certain users will still want to get into the detail. And for them, and everyone probably on this call, that's Excel. I was chatting to Tony about it a few months ago. I think we're quite fortunate in the insurance industry. A lot of people are very comfortable with Excel, putting data into Excel and doing a pivot on top of that. And in my early career, I was quite surprised by that. I was like, wow, this is a business person, and they know how to slice and dice data. It was impressive. And we're quite fortunate in that space within the insurance industry, I think.
No, I like your example because it's okay to start humble and to accept realities. Like people love Excel. Let's start at least by accepting and embracing that. Come along on the journey and you can still use your Excel.
Absolutely.
But we want to get you on the journey, right?
Yeah.
And then one can bring in little use cases and little quick wins, like put something in front of a sales agent just to make their sales, like even a tele agent, make that tele sales experience better for the agent and definitely better for the customer. Put in front of a broker, an underwriter, etc. So guys, we're kind of running out of time. That's been great. Tony, any last thoughts or insights from you on this?
Excel is not old school.
No, it's not.
I love Excel. I love it.
One of the guys in my team said it's
Guilty.
40th birthday or 30th birthday the other day. It was a few months ago. They had a big party. It was some decade birthday. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Powerful
Well, thank
tool.
you, everybody. I'll sign off from my side. Over to you, Tony.
Brilliant. Bruce,
Thanks,
thank you so much for managing that one so well. I thought couldn't just have my face and my voice the whole day, and you were a perfect alternative. Thank you so much for stepping in and doing that for us. Angus, Kali, and Mohammed, as always, great input, and so nice to host you guys here today. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Kava. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, gents.